Well, let's get more on this now from Jan Pospisil, who's a research director at the Austrian Study Centre for Peace and Conflict Resolution. He joins us now from Graz in Austria. Good to have you with us, Jan. We know that since the conflict in Sudan broke in April or mid-April, a lot of the attention was initially focused on what was happening in Khartoum and the surrounding areas. But now we're getting a lot of focus and attention being paid to the horrible violence that's unfolding in Darfur. Darfur, of course, was the scene of a bloody ethnic violence in the early 2000s. Can you tell us more about what's happening in Darfur right now and how that relates to the conflict between the army and the RSF?
Yeah, obviously the RSF had their roots in Darfur as the Janjaweed, and they were basically recruited and set up as a military force, a paramilitary force, to fight non-Arab militias in Darfur by the Bashir government in Sudan. What I heard initially was, since there's still a strong ethnic base of the RSF in Darfur, that like people were saying, like in the beginning, RSF get kind of the green light to start this war by kind of guaranteeing that this violence will remain in Khartoum, will be contained to the center of the country, and Darfur will be spared. But now, as you said, and as the report clearly showed, obviously this is not going to hold. And what we see now, basically, is a repeat of what happened already in the mid-2000s, of a militarization, basically, of militias on both sides, those attached to the armed forces, those attached to RSF, engaged in increasingly uncontrollable fighting along ethno-political lines.
Yes, and we know there have been several attempts to bring representatives from both the army and the RSF together for talks, particularly in Saudi Arabia. Those negotiations have been brokered by the United States and Saudi Arabia. How would you describe progress in terms of, I guess, bringing about a longer-term peace instead of these piecemeal ceasefires that we've seen so far?
Essentially, there's two problems here. First of all, there is the question of control. So the question is, even if we would assume SAF and RSF would agree on something, to what extent can they still control what they have broken loose, basically, in parts of the country, such as Darfur, but also increasingly in Kordofan and other places? So can they control these militias? And secondly, and here we have to be very clear, this exclusive approach that the United States and Saudi Arabia are taking by basically engaging in particular ceasefires between the SF and the RSF is not leading anywhere. So because there is no agreement and no space for basically a political agreement between these two generals. So what is needed here, if anything, is a broader, more inclusive approach that includes lots more voices from Sudan that would then also point towards long-term future transitional trajectories.
Well, that's right, because it's almost become a fait accompli that an immediate solution to the fighting would be to develop some sort of a power-sharing arrangement between the RSF and the army. But of course, Sudan was in the middle of a theoretical transition to democracy, but it seems now that has been put on the back burner indefinitely.
Yeah, we must not forget, as it has been said often before, this fighting was triggered by a failed power-sharing agreement between basically these two and others. And there is a real question why this should work what hasn't worked before. And was essentially like a failure by the UNITAMS, the United Nations Transition Mission, and all the others involved in these negotiations to really focus just on these main actors, when it became increasingly clear that this was rather fueling competition between them than accommodating everyone. And since this accommodation doesn't seem to be possible anymore, and this fighting gets also increasingly fueled by ethnic political hatred that goes broad in society, it becomes unlikely that there is a power-sharing arrangement possible between these two sides.
Okay, Jan Pospisil, we will have to leave it there, but thank you so much for sharing your analysis with us on TRT World.